Thank you. For the record, my name is Michael Fayette. I'm an attorney here in Gloucester, and I represent VJ&E Realty LLC, which is Mortellaro Lobster's property, and also Vincent and Gino Mortellaro, who own the small building that's at the corner of Fort Square and Commercial Street. They have been operating at that location on the corner of Fort Square and Commercial Street with their father since 1964, and they purchased a larger parcel in 2011 in April, curiously a couple of months after the last hotel proposal was withdrawn from the City Council. They are in the lobster business. They are successful. They don't make excuses for that, and they employ approximately 24 people full-time. Now, I'm going to address this comments in a different perspective from anyone else who's spoken so far, and I have caucused with the other people in the line, and they do not object to me taking a little bit more time in as much as I am representing a direct abutter and the person right across the street from this proposed development or this proposed rezoning. I'm going to address comments on the effect of this overlay proposal on the zoning ordinance itself, and then secondly, the effect of this proposal on the neighborhood and the issue of conflicts. First of all, with respect to the ordinance itself, we all recognize that a hotel is not an allowed use in the MI district. And that in fact, this proposal, and it was interesting to hear Mr. Cunningham say if he needs to build a porch on his house, he'd go get a variance. But since this has some public interest, you don't need to go get a variance. This is what this ordinance does. It removes the requirement of getting a variance and allows it as a matter of right in this district subject to the special permit requirements. I don't really see the distinction between his representation that if I have a porch in my house, I go get a variance, but if I want to build a 102-unit hotel, I don't need to. Secondly, it eliminates in section 5.25, 2.3, it eliminates in its entirety section 5.18 of the zoning ordinance. Now, those of you who are not familiar with 5.18, it is a separate section that has several, actually 5 different criteria that have to apply, and they're given equal weight with every other section of the ordinance, to proposals in the Marine Industrial District. Most notably, Section 2, anytime you have an application in the MI district that's non-marine related, will the proposed use preempt the use of the surrounding property for future development of water-related uses? Will the proposed use be compatible with the working waterfront character of the zone? To what extent will the proposed use beneficially affect the preservation of water-related uses in the area? If you look at the section that's proposed, it's in quite a quiet place in this overlay district proposal. This is gone. Any proposal that comes in front of the City Council, none of those criteria will be allowed to be applied. In addition to that, we have, and we've heard all about the necessity for conference centers here. Do you realize that there's not a single line in our zoning ordinance that allows a conference center? Is there a reason we haven't got conference centers before? There's no line that allows it. It's not contained in the business uses. It's not contained in the community uses. It, in fact, under the final section of the ordinance that prohibits any activity that's not otherwise allowed in this ordinance, it's not there. But what does this overlay district propose to do? Take something that I think we'd all agree would be good to have in the ordinance, but isn't in the ordinance, and then allows it as a matter of right if it's connected with a hotel. So it takes, again, something that's not otherwise allowed, bootstraps it in under the definition of accessory uses. That's no way to write an ordinance.
You're about 5 minutes in, Mike, okay?
I told you.
Yeah, no, I understand. I'm just giving you a little benchmark.
Okay. The second thing is the conflict on the neighborhood. Let's assume, for the sake of discussion, and it's the premise that I will use, is that one of the fundamental purposes of zoning is to prevent conflict between competing uses. That's something you're supposed to do all the time. Even if you think this hotel overlay district is a good idea, I think you would have to concede that there is the potential for conflict with the other competing interests and uses in the neighborhood. And let's assume, for the sake of discussion, that that meter for potential is right at 50-50. It could go either way. Doesn't matter what you think, it has to have a starting point. So what does this, or I'm going to tell you what this ordinance would have us do, and then you can draw your own conclusions as to whether there's going to be an increase in the potential or decrease in the potential. First of all, lot area per guest unit, every 2 guest units. It's worded improperly, but in this district they're saying there will not be any requirement that you have a minimum lot area for a guest unit. Same thing with open space, 0 requirement. Even in the central business district, and I heard a lot of people say, we need a downtown hotel. Do you realize that if this hotel was proposed on Main Street, which has no setbacks, nothing, it would still require 2,500 square feet of lot area per every 2 guest units? What you're saying is, we're willing to accept at this site, which will soon be vacant and empty, we're willing to accept a density level that is not even 100 times, 1,000,000 times, anything times 0 is infinity. That many times density, and we think it's grand. Additionally, the neighborhood. Now, increase your density to 1,000%. Where does that go in terms of creating potential for this dial to go? Clearly, when you have more people, you have more opportunities for conflicts. It's pretty simple. Front yard, no setback requirement asked for. They want to have 0 setback. If you're convinced that the hotel that's going to save all of Gloucester could be built on the edge of the street with 0 setback, then I don't know what you're thinking about. What you're saying is, we buy into the notion that every property, that this property can be built to the same level of right on the street and sheer face that you have on Main Street. Remember, Commercial Street is narrow, difficult, and we're proposing, or they're proposing, zero setbacks, sheer face. Even in the general industrial district in the city of Gloucester, it's a 10-foot setback. It's just inconceivable that we would accept on its face a 0 setback. Side yards, 0, 0, and rear yard, 0. That's the proposition. One of the most important parts of the ordinance, the zoning ordinance, is if you look at footnote E, which is in Schedule 3.23 of the ordinance in the MI district. There's a footnote 3. And I'm going to read you footnote 3 because it's very short, but it's also very important. And it was one of the bulwarks when this was first established. A building built on a lot that adjoins the harbor shall be set back from one side lot line by a distance equal to 1/3 of the building height, but not less than 10 feet. That, ladies and gentlemen, is another section that's gone because it's in the language of the overlay district. We don't have to abide by that either. It was critical that if you're going to monopolize the waterfront, at least you got to provide some setback. But this proposes to overlay, overreach in that district, so it's nothing. That's the proposal.
So, Mike, so we understand, Mike, you're 9 minutes in to the 18 minutes. So
I will speed it up. I will speed it up. The 75 feet in height, okay? All you're doing is inviting, with the 0 setbacks, a canyon effect on Commercial Street. Parking, Another big section where they're taking the guts of the rest of the ordinance in the neighborhood and creating conflict. They're proposing that would be one parking space per guest unit, which is fine. And then they're saying that the accessory uses, the conference center, the restaurant, there would be no requirement to provide additional parking for those uses. And you heard in the initial presentation, you're talking about a restaurant, which would serve up to 100 people, and conference facilities, I believe the number that was used was 125. So we're talking about over 200 people could be frequenting this venue, and we're not providing any parking in the planning stage for those people. Now, in addition, it's quite clear there's going to be valet parking. If you've ever been to some of the more upscale hotels, you'll see the queue of cars, usually black cars, someone standing outside with a little beanie waiting for the guests. Put that same scenario on Commercial Street, taking people off site, and tell me that's not going to create additional conflicts with the truck traffic and everything else. Also, many of the properties on Commercial Street use their parking during their workday, and their workday starts much earlier than I suspect the guest at this hotel will be getting up. Another potential conflict. So I think that you have to look at that. I apologize for going over, but no one has spoken to your real chore. Does this plan address the needs? It doesn't matter if we all wish that we lived someplace that had everything that you could imagine. The point is, this ordinance has effect, people have relied upon it, and it's up to you to make sure that you use the tools at your disposal to make it work for everybody, not just ignore it for the purposes of a select group that has made this unbelievable gift to the city. Thank you.